Hi everybody, I'm Mike McCrory and this is Would You Make It? I've made a lot of chessboards and quite a few chessboard videos, so this time I want to change it up a little bit and I'm going to make a chessboard out of logs. So let's get started. To start milling the wood, I'm going to mount this walnut log to a jig that I've made that will hold the log steady while I run it through my bandsaw. I had my CNC running the whole time, working on something else, so that's what you hear in the background, unfortunately. The backside of the jig just runs along my fence. The client for this board drove these walnut and maple logs up from his home in Alabama. They have sentimental value because they are from trees that his grandmother planted decades ago. It was 3 years ago that the client drove the logs up, and I've had them sitting under my workshop because they were still pretty wet. I have a roller supporting the other end of the log as it comes off the bandsaw. Next, I'll remove the bark because everything mixed in with the bark can dull the blade. I could have mounted it back onto the jig, but I just ran it through freehand this time. Next, I'll run it through the jointer to flatten and square up two sides. You can see that the wood has a lot of rot, so I'll run it through the bandsaw again to remove most of the wood that is unusable. Then I'll mill it some more on the jointer. You can see how small this piece of wood is after removing all the unusable material from the log. Next, I'll work on the maple log. And then I'll prepare the longest log, which is about 50 inches long, so that I can use those pieces for the frame around the chessboard. After this initial milling, I'm going to let these pieces continue to dry in my workshop for another 6 months or so. It's 6 months later, and the long piece of walnut that I was going to use for the frame had some bad cracking in each end. I probably should have coated the ends of the boards to slow down the drying process. So I'm preparing one more log just in case I need it for the frame pieces, and I probably will. I have this moisture meter from Toptes so that I can see how wet this freshly milled log is. It's reading about 20% and that's still too wet, so I'll set it aside for a few more weeks. I like this meter because it has a background that changes from red to yellow to green depending on the moisture level. You can see the long crack in the piece from 6 months ago. It's reading low, so it's ready to be used. For the maple, I had to change a setting for the harder wood, and it's reading somewhere between 8% to 10%, so that's good to use as well. I'll start with one of the smaller walnut pieces to cut the thickness of the squares. I have my fence set to just a little bit under ½ an inch. These pieces will ultimately be about 1/4 of an inch after all the sanding is done. I use the jointer after each cut to remove tooth marks from the bandsaw so that I always have one side that is flat. The maple piece is much bigger, so I'll be able to get 3 strips out of each of these slices that I'm cutting. You can see the spalting in the maple, so this is going to look really nice when it's all put together. Now I'll cut the strips to be about 2½ inches wide. I'll get a total of 9 strips, but I only need 8. Next, on the table saw, I'll cut the strips to all be the same width. I was shooting for 2¼ inches, but one of the pieces of walnut was a little too narrow, so I ended up with pieces that were about 2.2 inches, or about 56 millimeters. I'll trim all the strips to be the same length, and then it's ready for the first glue up. I'm going to glue squares on the top and the bottom of the board. If the squares are only on one side of the plywood, then they have a greater chance of warping the plywood as the wood expands and contracts. Having squares on both sides of the plywood helps to balance the forces of the expansion and contraction. I'm using parchment paper underneath so that the glue squeeze-out doesn't stick to my clamping jig. And then I'll put a layer of parchment paper on top and glue together the strips for the other side. This makes it much easier to clamp horizontally because it's always hard to get the clamps to stay in place when you have only 3/8 of an inch of thickness. By clamping both together, I have about 3/4 of an inch of thickness. I'll clamp down a slightly smaller piece of plywood on top to keep it flat, and then I'll add clamps to put some horizontal pressure. After the glue has cured, I'll run the piece through the drum sander. And then I'll use my crosscut sled to square up one end of each piece. And then I'll cut all the squares with my fence. I have one leftover strip of maple, so I'll use that to position the fence so that I get the correct setup. By the way, Top Test gave me an additional moisture meter to give away, so if you're interested in a chance to get one, it's very simple. All you have to do is comment on this video. Hopefully you'll like and subscribe, but that doesn't increase your chances. I'll download all the comments and use a random number generator to select one. Give it a shot. If this one goes well, maybe I can do other giveaways in the future. I cut the plywood to be exactly 1 inch wider than the playing field to give me a half-inch piece that extends all the way around the playing field. These cauls are designed to fit around the plywood with an extra half-inch lip at the top so that the playing field will be centered. I have packing tape on that upper lip so that the cauls won't stick to the squares. And then I'll clamp it up. This is where I could really use 3 hands. After the glue has cured on the top side, I'll flip the board over and glue up the bottom side. Before I run the board through the sander, I'm putting some Total Boat epoxy to fill some of the voids caused by insects and a bit of rot. While that's curing, I'll start working on the frame pieces. I ended up getting only 2 frame pieces from that longboard. It would have been long enough to make all 4 pieces if it weren't for that long crack, so I'm glad I milled up the extra log. These pieces are all too wide, which is good. I'm starting by cutting off a fairly wide strip to eliminate a bit of tear out caused by the planer that I've highlighted. Next, I'll use my dado set to cut grooves to hold some maple edge banding. And then with that leftover piece of maple, I have just enough material to get 4 strips of edge banding that will be about 3/8 of an inch thick. Then I'll fine tune them with the drum sander to get a perfect fit. While the glue is curing, I'll use some TotalBoat epoxy with some black dye to fill in some of those other voids. I'll trim off the edge banding strips, and then I'll cut the groove that will fit over the 1/2-inch plywood tongue. Then I'll run the chessboard through the table saw and trim off the smallest amount possible to get clean edges and to be sure that the top and bottom are aligned so that the frame will fit tightly. The cauls that I use for the glue up are good, but they're not good enough to get everything perfectly aligned. A difference of even 1/2 millimeter would be noticeable. Next, I'll cut the miters on the corners of the frame pieces. After testing the fit, it's ready for the glue up. The next day, I sanded the top and bottom so that everything is flat. There are still some soft spots, so I'll fill those with thin Starbond CA glue, and then I'll sand some more to remove the drum sander scratch marks that I've highlighted in the lower left corner. After sanding, I'll run a 16th inch roundover bit around the top and bottom edges, and then I'll sand everything by hand with 220 grit sandpaper. Next, I'll seal everything with de-waxed shellac. I haven't bought Zinsser Seal Coat for a long time because the price went up dramatically after COVID, but I still use that can to hold what I mix up from shellac flakes. After the shellac dries, I sand it with 320 grit sandpaper. Now it's ready for me to spray on pre-catalyzed lacquer. I lightly sand in between coats with 320 grit sandpaper. I put a total of 4 coats on this board. So, I gotta ask, would you make it?